Hi, I'm Malika Bilal in for Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today, should female athletes with naturally high levels of testosterone be forced to lower the hormone before they're allowed to compete? We look at fairness in women's sports and the debate around testosterone. Our digital producer, Dan Ming, is here looking out for all of your live feedback. And today's show is special because, Dan, you pitched it.
That's right. I pitched it because this is something I'm studying right now in graduate school. So I'm really excited to get this conversation going. And so is our community. Have a look at my computer. Halima writes in, isn't that like asking a naturally tall basketball player to get joint surgery to be shorter? So we want to hear from all of you at home. What do you think? Can a biological advantage, such as high testosterone levels, be unfair to other athletes? Tweet me with the hashtag AJStream.
Hi, I'm Joanna Virgo. I'm a feminist and a guerrera to the core, and I'm at the stream.
In professional sports, drug testing is a way of making sure competition is fair. It's meant to keep cheaters out of the game. But in women's athletics, testing goes beyond simply filtering out users of performance-enhancing substances. After winning gold in the 2009 World Championships, South African runner Caster Semenya was accused of being unfairly masculine and was subjected to a gender test. She was banned from international competition until the following year when her case was cleared. In response to the controversy, major sports governing bodies ruled that female athletes whose bodies naturally produce high levels of testosterone are not allowed to compete unless they lower the hormone. And to do that, they have to undergo genital surgery or take hormone balancing drugs. The argument is that high testosterone levels create an unfair performance advantage for women and that maintaining normal levels of the hormone evens out the playing field. So does this policy promote fairness or cause discrimination? To help us talk about this, we're joined by Dr. Martin RITZEN, 2010 member of the IOC Medical Commission, Hida Valoria, chairperson of the organization Intersex International, and an intersex representative at the IOC Commission, KATRINA, senior research scholar at Stanford University, Cameron Myler, four-time U.S. Olympian, and joining us a bit later is PAYOSHNI MITRA. She's an Indian activist and researcher on gender issues in sports. Welcome to all of you. Now, I'd like to start on my laptop. Hida, this is the policy. We've made this statement here from the IOC, pulled it up. If in the opinion of the expert panel, the investigated athlete has female hyperandrogenism that confers a competitive advantage, that investigated athlete may be declared ineligible to compete. Now, Hida, you were in the room when this policy was being debated. What is your take on this?
My take on this is it's a way to facilitate discrimination against these women. There was lots of evidence that testosterone actually does not confer an advantage. There are women with high testosterone who are allowed to compete, whose testosterone is not functional, and yet they're overrepresented. In other words, there's more of them in sport than regular, and they have no functional testosterone. So we have evidence against the theory. The theory was really just a way to do something about these women who, quote, look like men. And there were a lot of comments about, how will we spot them? We'll recognize them because they're ugly, etc. There was discrimination in the room, pure and simple.
Well, before we get into the evidence before and against the theory, as you said, I want to bring in PAYOSHNI. PAYOSHNI, I want to start with a human story, really, and this is a story that recently made headlines. Take a look at my computer. Indian sprinter Duti Chand, she was banned from competition when she reportedly failed to test within the, quote, normal, unquote, range of testosterone levels. As of now, there's also a campaign, Fairness for Duty, that has been started. And PAYOSHNI, you work closely with Duti. You spoke to her today. What is she going through right now?
Yes, I spoke to Duti this evening, actually, India time, and she was on her way back from Chennai, where she wasn't able to compete at the Interdepartmental Railways meet. And she said that I asked her that I'm going to speak at this panel, and what do you want me to tell them? And she said, I want to be back on track. sport is life for me, and therefore, I haven't never cheated, I've never doped, so why stop me for a natural hormone that I have? This is exactly what she told me to tell the world.
Dr. RITZEN, I want to go straight to you and let's talk about the science. Is there science behind this that places testosterone equal to athletic performance and ability?
Well, it's the fact that sports is divided into male and female categories is the real background problem here. And then how can you define the male and female fitness, and what is different between males and females that make them different? We know that if the very best females would compete with in world championships with men, they will end up far behind. Maybe the best would be number 40, 50, 60 in the male category. So there is a distinct difference, even in super trained, very well trained men and women. And so what is it that makes a difference? Well, there are probably many different cases. But testosterone is the only factor, as a matter of fact, that where there is no overlap between healthy females and healthy males. That is, we also know that testosterone or anabolic hormones are building muscles. If a female gets, or a male, get administered testosterone, they will enhance their muscle volume and they will enhance their muscle strength.
So Dr. RITZEN...
So testosterone is one important, but it's not the only one.
Right.
Yes.
Right. So Dr. RITZEN, we're getting some pushback
Yes.
about what you're saying right now. I'd like to read a comment from Twitter. Rifle says, but it's not the only reason that female athletes do better, or any athlete. They put in the same training and effort as the rest. And then Bert says, testosterone levels in women can't help predict who will perform better. So KATRINA, I'd like to bring you into this conversation. You've been studying this, and then maybe Dr. RITZEN can respond. KATRINA, do you think that it's true that testosterone is the dividing line between male and female in sports?
If I can, Dan, I'd like to come in at a slightly different angle.
It's not the only one.
Well, Dr. RITZEN says it's not the only one. Let's hear from KATRINA, and then Dr. RITZEN, you can respond.
Yeah.
Yeah, because actually my question is for Dr. RITZEN.
I think it's a misunderstanding.
To meet you. What I would love to ask is that in a very recent article
Dr. RITZEN, let's let KATRINA respond, and KATRINA, there is a 3-second delay, so that's why we're having the difficulty, but go ahead and respond and we'll let Dr. RITZEN finish.
Sure. So actually what I would love to do is take a quote from Dr. RITZEN's most recent paper, and this looks at serum testosterone and androgen levels in elite female athletes from the Daegu World Championships. And the quote in there is, he's the senior author, "There is no clear scientific evidence proving that a high level of T is a significant determinant of performance in female sports." So when I read that, what I read into that is that it undermines the rationale for the policy. And I would like to understand how does one have a policy without that clear scientific evidence? And one more quick point, you had talked about exogenous testosterone, but also in that same paper, we also know that exogenous, meaning doping testosterone, does not operate in the body in the same way that natural and endogenous does. It doesn't mean it doesn't do similar things, but it's not the same. And so taking those two things into account, I think that undermines the policy.
Okay, Dr. RITZEN, your response?
Yes. No, the quotation that you just mentioned refers to the span for normal, healthy women, which is testosterone levels between, let's say, 0.1 and 3 nanomoles per liter. If you go up to 10, 11, 12, 15 nanomoles per liter, there is no doubt that this enhances physical performance. The scientific evidence, of course, is not a randomized controlled study, because you can't give women testosterone and others placebo to see if there is a difference. But in the experience from the German Democratic Republic back in the 70s and 80s, they have clearly demonstrated how well it works if they add anabolic steroids to healthy women.
All right,
I appreciate
there's
that,
no doubt
but
that
this isn't doping.
if you add testosterone,
And I want to make one quick point, and then I'll turn it over. I actually don't agree with the notion that these women aren't normal and healthy.
Yes.
In fact, what we know from the paper of the 4 women that were intervened upon is that all of the surgeries that were done on them, according to the authors themselves, who are in part affiliated with the IAAF, is that actually they were all medically unnecessary procedures that included clitoral surgery. So intersex people have fought for a long time against this idea that they are abnormal, and actually their testosterone levels are part of the normal variation. So I think it's somewhat tautological to remove them in order to define normal
Katrina.
variation in T levels.
Katrina, I'd like to read you something, a tweet that we got. Nicole writes, bodies like the IOC and the IAAF are governing bodies, and hence it's their prerogative to decide the appropriate course of action. So Nicole's saying rules are rules. But then we have someone else talking about the treatment. Gladkel saying, no, that seems like they're being punished for their body, and won't tampering with their hormones harm them? So Hida, I'd like you to speak on this. What does the treatment involve, and are there side effects for the athletes?
Yeah, the treatments are horrible. A clitoral reduction surgery takes away orgasmic capacity. It creates pain. Hormones that are unnecessary are very dangerous and also interfere with the training process. And I do want to get back to what Katrina pointed out. You know, when Dr. RITZEN says twice, normal, healthy women, he's revealing what's really behind these policies. Why do they exist at all? If someone is a woman and was raised as a woman and has not doped and lives legally as a woman, she should be allowed to compete as a woman. And I do want to point out, there are men who have, if we're going to say, let's say they find their proof, they're conducting more studies, they prove that testosterone gives an advantage. It doesn't matter, because there are men that also have atypical bodies. It's called XYY chromosomes. They have more testosterone. They are atypical men, just like some women, you know, are outside of the typical range, and they are not being tested. Why? It's the typical regulation of women. And women
I want to bring in now, Hida, on that point, I want to bring in now someone, and Dr. RITZEN,
this is a misunderstanding.
Because I want to bring in someone who
Katrina.
actually has competed, and I hear both of you, and I hear that it's a misunderstanding. I want to hear from someone who's been out there competing. Now, Cameron, we actually heard from another athlete. This is Diane Cummings. She's a Canadian middle distance runner, and she says there has to be a system. So, Cameron, have a listen to what she told the stream.
You know, it does kind of suck that we have this. Females are the default category because we are not as strong, and we can't run as fast, and we can't jump as high, can't throw as far as our male counterparts. But at the end of the day, we have to have a system that protects females so that we don't have men competing as women. Nowadays, it's a profession for a lot of us. This is how we earn our money.
So, Cameron, what do you think about that?
Well, a couple of points that I'd like to respond to. First, when I first was on the U.S. national team for luge, it was in 1985. So there was still an East German team and a Soviet team. And I was, as a 15-year-old, astounded that there were women who were my height, who were 40 pounds heavier than me. And I thought, oh, they must train really hard. But in fact, they were partaking in a system-wide doping program. So I have competed against women who have an unfair advantage. And granted, that source of the advantage was an exogenous testosterone or some other steroid. But I agree that there does need to be some way to feel as though you have an even playing field, and that when you go out there as an athlete, you are competing against people who are more or less, like you, and have the same sort of capabilities. So while this is not the best test, I know it's the current test. But when I was competing, it was still called a sort of gender test.
And what did that involve? What is a gender test? And I love the air quotations, but what does that involve?
Well, right, exactly. So it was not so invasive. You would arrive at the Olympic Village, go to the clinic, and have the inside of your cheek swabbed with a Q-tip, and then it was tested. Your genetics were tested. So if you came out with the right ones, you could compete as a woman. And I have a card that says I'm a female and can compete in that category.
All right, Cameron, I'd like to bring in another point, and I'd like to get Dr. RITZEN to respond to this. We asked about this issue of testosterone testing and unfair advantages, and Frank on Google Plus wrote, "First world problems." And I think that gets into the whole issue of who's being affected by this. And we see in the media a lot of the women who are affected by this policy are from developing countries. So it's not necessarily just a first world problem. Why do you think that is, Dr. RITZEN?
I think that's because in the more developed healthcare systems, patients or individuals that have these inborn errors are diagnosed very early and treated very early. While in some developing countries, they can grow up as a girl and they do not start masculinizing until puberty.
All right. Hida,
so that's why there's discrepancies between.
Hida, I see you smiling there. Do you want to respond to what Dr. RITZEN just said?
I do. I do take offense, as I'm sure the entire community does, at being called someone with an inborn error. These are healthy people, in fact, so healthy that they're competing at elite levels. Mm-hmm. And to address what Cameron was saying, these are women. In 50 years ago, David Zirin wrote a great piece. 50 years ago, Norman Cox, an Olympic official, said that about black women who have a different physicality, that the IOC should create a special category of competition for them, the unfairly advantaged hermaphrodites. So, we've seen attempts to have these regulations towards black people as well, because they have different physicalities. Just because someone has a different physicality that might make them better than you at a sport doesn't mean people should be sore losers and try to eliminate those inborn traits.
Right, and I know that you're upset. PAYOSHNI is also upset. We brought her back on the phone. PAYOSHNI, I want you to pick up on what Hida is saying.
Can I break in?
Doctor, I hear you, but I'd like to bring PAYOSHNI back in, and then Dr. RITZEN, you can respond. PAYOSHNI.
Yes, I just heard Professor RITZEN talking about how there is lack of medical attention to players coming from developing nations, and I do want to add here that it's just the way we look at this problem. It's not about whether they have got medical attention or not. I think in developing countries, in what they call the rural and mountainous regions of countries with poor care, there probably we are more open to plurality of bodies, of culture and traditions, which people sitting at the IOC and the IS medical commissions are probably completely oblivious about. So this is I think when they're talking about advantage, which is due to androgen, they must also take into account the advantage which is due to national income, family income, etc. Before pointing out at people, at our athletes who are coming from developing nations, clearly if he's saying that athletes from developing nations are targeted, and therefore we need to look into this as a different problem. We are creating new binaries.
Let's give Dr. RITZEN a chance to respond to
science
that.
And medically unequipped countries with poor care.
By the way, PAYOSHNI, I hear you. Let's give Dr. RITZEN a chance to respond to your questions. Dr. RITZEN.
From young female athletes, just because
PAYOSHNI, I know that you feel very passionately about this, and of course you're also on the phone, so that makes our connection not quite as good, but I'd like to give Dr. RITZEN the chance to respond to what you just put in front of him. Dr. RITZEN.
Yes, when I call something abnormality, this is from a biochemical point of view. Most of these women have a mutation in their genes that prevents either sensitivity to androgenic hormones, or it lacks an enzyme that is necessary for converting one steroid to the other. So it's a biochemical term. I'm not talking about that people are abnormal. I'm sorry, that's a misunderstanding. May I also correct that I'm not a member of the IOC Medical Commission. I've been taking part in discussions and in this context, but I'm not a member of the IOC Medical Commission.
All right, thank you, Dr. RITZEN. I'd like to bring Cameron. I actually have a tweet that I'd like to read for you. So Cameron, take a listen. Graham writes in, the playing field was never level. We all have different advantages and disadvantages. That is sport. So Cameron, what do you think about that?
I want to speak about it again. Excuse me. Can you hear me?
PAYOSHNI, go ahead. Yeah.
I'd like to respond as well.
PAYOSHNI's talking, Cameron's talking. PAYOSHNI, I'll let you get in really quickly, and then Cameron can follow up. PAYOSHNI?
Yes. There is a poster presentation, even KATRINA is aware of this, by Myron Janelle Youngvis, but people who have probably, have been part of these medical commissions, even they have said clearly that there is nothing. It's an illusion to believe that there is a level playing field, and it's not only to do with female athletes, but it's also to do with any athlete who has a genetic advantage, and we are always happy with that because it's about competitive advantage. Sport is all about competition. We are talking about international elite sport here. So why we are specifying, why we are targeting athletes, quote unquote, from developing nations who have, in some cases, high level of androgen?
Cameron?
So I'll rephrase my previous comment about a level playing field, because absolutely I take those points that competition is about having some advantage or another. So what I meant to say was that an unfair advantage, and rules are made by, there was a reference earlier to the IOC and the IAAF being the governing bodies that make the rules by which we all compete, and I believe the intent is to eliminate unfair advantage. I do want to make one separate point on the policy, and one issue that I have with it, both as an athlete and a lawyer, is that it gives the opportunity to a National Olympic Committee to, quote, actively investigate any perceived deviation in sex characteristics. So that seems to me like it's incredibly subjective, and I'm not certain how that is interpreted. And for me, if there's going to be a rule, I would like that everyone be subject to it equally.
Well, Cameron, actually, I love the point that you just ended on, because that's where I want to take it in the post show, and asking something that our community has also asked: why isn't this taking place within male sporting events? So, Dan, going to the post show, what do you have to teach
There's
us
a lot
with?
going on. People are on both sides of this divide. One person, Orla, writes in, yes, there should simply be a testosterone benchmark. He's in support of the policy. But then Mikey wrote on Facebook, let's face it, we're all created equal. While we were all created equal, we weren't all created with equal abilities. That's what makes the world so rich and diverse. To level everyone off is to destroy that diversity.
Right. So we'll talk about some possible alternatives in the post show. That's where we will take you. Stream.aljazeera.com. You don't want to miss it. Now, on the next show, the Australian government is fighting to curb the number of its nationals who are taking up arms with groups like Islamic State. But will new counterterrorism measures protect or discriminate against the Muslim communities in the country? We'll discuss that on Thursday. We'll see you online. Hello, this is the Stream's online post show. We've been talking about the controversial testosterone testing in female competitive sports. We're going to get right back to that conversation.
We're getting responses to Duti's story. I'd like to read a tweet here. Ashley said, "These people did not ask to be born this way, and to told you cannot compete is heartbreaking." But I'd like to also ask what you all think of other solutions. Lindsay writes in, "So test everyone, create competitions based on math, testosterone, height, weight, body mass. That'd be fun." So Katrina, what do you think of this? Are there other ways to organize athletics that aren't about male and female?
I don't really think, Dan, that that's quite the issue. I have two quick points if I can make them. One is that one of the undercurrents in this conversation, the IAAF and IOC have been adamant this isn't sex testing, and yet when you listen very carefully to the conversation, there have been notions about what divides males from females, men impersonating women, and these women not being women. All of that has been said in this conversation. And that's problematic and tells me that it really comes back to Hida's point about gender discrimination and problems with gender nonconforming women and misunderstandings about testosterone. So listen, everybody knows athleticism, elite athleticism is complicated. I've been interviewing elite athletes. They are very clear on what they do to get to the level they're at. And many of them do not mention testosterone. They talk about training, nutrition, access to sporting facilities, money to travel to competitions, etc. And PAYOSHNI already mentioned the divide between women in developing countries and women in the global south around access to resources. So if we're really concerned about fairness, I think we need to think beyond one biological trait, testosterone, and think more broadly about what fairness would look like in athletics.
Well, speaking of fairness, of course, there's also calls of whether or not this is discrimination. Dr. RITZEN, why are men exempt from this?
Because there is no scientific proof that a somewhat higher testosterone level in men will increase physical performance. It's an asymptotic curve. If you add a little bit to of testosterone to the female low levels, you make a lot of difference. If you add a little bit of testosterone to the high male levels, you don't make much of a difference. But it does make a difference if you treat with very large doses of testosterone. And that's why this is called doping and is forbidden in sport.
Hida, I saw you chuckle at that.
Well, there's just a lot of contradictions.
Yeah,
you know, first you're saying that it's similar to exogenous, meaning fake testosterone, and that's why we have the divide, because we assume that it's similar to the cases of doping. But now you're saying that it's not similar when it's natural in men. So, you know, essentially it's a double standard.
It is similar.
I think it's very clear. It's a double standard against women.
No,
women
it's
should not be regulated.
Can I come in again?
Dr. RITZEN, sure. Well, actually, no, I'm not finished.
I mean, Katrina.
You know, women have been regulated
let's
for
let
decades.
Hida finish.
You have a lot of medical
misunderstandings.
I would like to finish, Dr. RITZEN.
You have
answer the question that was asked.
Katrina.
Hello?
Dr. RITZEN, it looks like everyone wants to talk at once because this is a point, obviously, that's striking a lot of nerves. So I'd like Hida to finish her point. Dr. RITZEN will go to you, and then PAYOSHNI, I hear you on the phone. So Hida?
Thank you. I just want to say women were first banned from sports because it was considered too masculine for women to do all together. And then later on, you know, there's policies, you know, discrimination against lesbians or anyone that's seen too manly. And now what these policies do is they're frightening women into having to wear makeup and look pretty so they won't be accused of having high levels. And, you know, there's so many places for women to look pretty outside of sports.
But Dr. RITZEN, your response? Let's let Dr. RITZEN respond to that.
There's tons of places. This is sports. Let's let women compete.
Okay, Hida, let's let Dr. RITZEN respond to that. Dr. RITZEN.
It's not easy to break in when someone is talking all the time. But let me, Katrin, you want to make your point, but you're using a lot of non-scientific sort of expressions. You say that women are forced to terrible surgery or to medication, and that this is both give irreversible damage. That's not true about the medical treatment. And I don't, it's implicitly stated in the regulations that no one must be forced into any irreversible action. Medication,
well,
when you talk about the terrible... Can I finish?
Please finish.
Can I finish?
Finish, Dr. Ritzen.
When you talk about when you talk about irreversible damage by medication, the medication is most of the time oral contraceptives that is taken by billions of women. That is not an irreversible medical treatment. And you mentioned XYY men. They do not have exaggerated testosterone levels, and they are not at all stronger than other men. There are a lot of misconceptions that you bring out in order to make your point, but that's not a fair way to do it.
Okay, Dr. Ritzen, I want to get our community back in because I know they have a lot to say.
So we have a tweet here from Essay. Essay writes, because society finds it easier to question the abilities of women in doing sports, it's a role that isn't supposed to fit. So she thinks there's a serious discriminatory aspect here. Katrina, I can hear you trying to get in. What did you want to say?
I have a couple of thoughts. I am not privy to everything that's happened to all of the athletes that have been investigated. So when I talk about the interventions that have been done, I'm relying on a paper published by IAAF officials and those designed to implement this policy that talks about gonadectomy and clitoral surgery, and that these were medically unnecessary interventions. So I have a couple of questions around that, and it's not a matter of me being unscientific. Many of the things that I have said, I've pulled from the publications that the officials themselves have written. So those interventions to me are serious, irreversible, and problematic. And what we don't know, and I think PAYOSHNI could speak to this, is what the informed consent process is like. It is, in my mind, inherently coercive to require women to undergo these to continue their careers, and the context in developing countries, I believe, is yet different and more coercive. And the recent example with Duty, I think, illustrates this a lot.
Katrina, you passed it over to PAYOSHNI, so PAYOSHNI?
Yes, I think there are quite a few things that I would like to add here. Number one, that they are saying that gender verification tests have been abolished, and they have this current policy of hyperandrogenism. But if you look at the markers, it's the same markers as the previous gender verification test. So when Indian press came out saying that Duty has been gender tested, you cannot really blame them, because they, or blame the officials who are talking about it, because they really don't see any difference in the procedure of the gender verification test and the hyperandrogenism policy, which is, has been implemented right now. So one, that. Number two, to what Katrina just said, yes, there is a huge pressure on these young athletes, because they have been doing well. They have been playing for a long time now, and you suddenly tell them that you cannot compete unless and until you lower your androgen level. And that is obviously a huge pressure. They're 18, 19-year-olds. In the article that Katrina mentioned, it clearly says that young female athletes, in Duti's case, she's 18 as well. So there is a huge pressure on them to just think and say, okay, I want to participate no matter what, and if I have to get a surgery, then I will. But what are the consequences of this surgery? Why should someone feel forced to undergo surgery just because she wants to compete in sports? So that's the question that our doctors need to answer. Is it ethical to say that, yes, you will have to undergo surgery if you want to compete. You'll have to fix your body in a certain way if you want to compete as a woman. Is it ethical for these, on behalf of these doctors? Or do they think it's an ethical practice at all?
PAYOSHNI, those are questions that we'll have to debate online because that's all the time we have for this show. Dr. RITZEN, I hear you, but I've run out of time. But that means that the conversation will continue online. I'd like to end it, though, with the community.
Yeah, we have one tweet here from Dawson. I'd like to give the last word to him. He writes, "There are many advantages in the variations of build and physique in sports. It'd be a slippery slope to start governing them all."
Slippery slope indeed. Now I have just enough time to tell you about the next show. The Australian government is fighting to curb the number of its nationals taking up arms with groups like Islamic State. But will new counter-terrorism measures protect or discriminate against the Muslim communities in the country? We'll discuss that on Thursday. See you online.